Hey y'all, I wanted to show you what it looks like when you're actually knitting up this yarn. So again, I'm using Cascade Yarn's Friday Harbor, which is an 80% merino wool and a 20% silk blend. I've knit a little bit of garter stitch already, and I am going to speed up this knitting a gauge swatch. As you can see, I've knit a little bit more, and I'm going to continue to knit and speed up the process, and hopefully what I wanted to show you will just happen naturally. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was that sometimes when you're knitting, this yarn can get a little bit splitty. Now, when I say a little bit splitty, I mean I knit all of this, and this is my first split, but it does happen. And I think it's due to the fact that this yarn has 6 different plies. If you look at this here, count them with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this yarn has 6 different plies, and I think just if you're knitting really fast and not paying attention, you can get some split yarn, which of course is not the end of the world, but it is something to note. So I'm going to speed up again, and I will check back with you when my gauge swatch is complete. So as I'm binding off here, I think it's pretty evident that you can see the yarn's tendency to want to split. So if you are working any kind of stitch pattern that has like a slip knit or a knit 2 together, or slip 1, knit 2 together, drag the stitch over the other stitch, you should be extra careful about where you're putting your needle, just so you don't split your yarn accidentally. And I'm almost done here. Like I said, I'm binding off, and then we will get into analyzing our swatch. So here we have our Friday Harbor gauge swatch, the first one. And I will be making 2 so we can see how the fabric reacts when it is felted. So I knit this gauge swatch on number 4 stainless steel needles. I always knit with a cable in the middle, just because, even when I'm knitting back and forth, just because it's easier on my hands. So I'm going to take a measurement for gauge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm getting about 5 stitches per inch with a number 4. Now the tag says to use a number 7. That's what they recommend, but I always find, just to get the density of fabric that I prefer, I always need to go down a couple of needle sizes. So I'm getting 5 stitches per inch here. Okay, so again, this is Cascade's Friday Harbor, 80% merino wool, 20% silk blend. It is not a super wash. It is a hand wash yarn, and we're going to be seeing what it looks like when we felt it on a different gauge swatch. But for now, I want to talk about the stitch definition. I think the stitch definition is really lovely. I think it comes across really well. This is a very neutral color, so it would lend itself really well to cabling and other details like slip stitch patterns. This yarn comes in the yardage of 219 yards per skein. So I think that's enough for me to make a hat for myself. I have a relatively small head, but I have a lot of hair. So 219 is enough for me to make a hat for myself. I also, the sample that I made, I'm going to switch camera angles. So the sample that I made with Cascade Yarns Friday Harbor was, I decided to go with a pair of little socks. I live in Wisconsin, so I like to wear a pair of wool socks over my cotton socks. It's just a me thing. But I wanted to give this yarn a very thorough test of how it holds up. And I think that so far so good. It is holding up pretty darn well. There's a tiny bit of pilling here on the heel, but that is of course to be expected, especially with socks. It is the hardest wearing garment that you could possibly choose. And I did that because I wanted to see if the 20% silk really made a difference. And I think that it does. It definitely holds a shape pretty well. I think that the silk does make it a little looser, especially for socks. Now, if you were knitting a scarf I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you're knitting something really heavy, like a coat or a very heavy sweater that you want to be very form-fitting, I would say you need to use smaller needles, because that silk really does make a difference in the amount that it is going to drape. But for socks, the silk really does help to keep it strong. I've noticed that with other wool socks that I've made that don't have silk in it, that are just pure wool. Now, I've used, of course, sock yarn with a little bit of nylon, and that helps. But if you're looking for something that is completely natural, no plastics whatsoever, the silk is a really great option because it is a very strong fiber. I would say that this yarn is a worsted weight yarn, and with a worsted weight yarn, I would usually use a size 4 needle. That's just standard for myself and how I want the fabric density to be. This yarn has such a beautiful stretch to it, but then as you can see, it's going back to its original shape. Now I'm going to block this and show you how it blocks out. A lot of times yarn can change its shape when you get it wet. So I'm going to show you what it looks like when it gets wet. And I'm also going to make a second gauge swatch in the exact same size and attempt to felt it in the washing machine. I wanted to show you the felted swatch versus the just knitted swatch, and I'm going to put the felted one over. So these were the exact same size. I lined them up on the bottom here, And that is the amount of shrinkage you get. I'd say that's about a 1/2 inch. So that's the felted. Let's see. And that's the knitted. This has a lot more give to it, and this I think the stitch definition is still really nice on the felted one. And so if you're looking just to tighten up the fabric a little bit, I think it's actually quite a good yarn to felt. Not if you're making like felted slippers or something that you're really trying to felt down and get rid of the stitch definition. But if you're just trying to tighten up the fabric so it has a little bit more of a hold, because like I was saying with the socks, they have gotten a little bit looser. And so you want to mind your gauge and use smaller needle sizes if you're not looking for that kind of drape. I mean, if you're making something really drapey, then it's great. But because it does have a fair amount of drape, if you just want to tighten up the fabric a little bit, felting it one time in the washing machine is a really good option. I'm actually really liking felting some of my knits just a little bit to just tighten up those stitches. But that's a personal preference. So now I wanted to show you that before I went and blocked these. So I'm going to show you these swatches side by side, and then I'm going to block them. So here we have the felted gauge swatch and the knitted gauge swatch. Neither of these have been blocked yet. So as you can see, it has shrunk a little bit, but you still have that stitch definition. Maybe it loses a little bit of the shine that silk gives it, but I still think that it's really, really a great turnout there. As far as the color goes, I want to talk a little bit about the color. This color would lend itself great to sweaters, and anything that you want to have a really defined and clear stitch definition, because it is a very neutral color. This yarn does come in 22 other colors, which is a fair amount to choose from. They're all solid colors, and they are earth tones, which I love earth tones, so that's great for me. Okay, so here we have our fully blocked pieces. I'm going to take out the pins and see how they lay. It looks like this one, the unfelted version, is laying beautifully, as is the felted swatch. Yeah, looks like this yarn has so much drape. It's really beautiful. Look at that stitch definition. It's lovely. It has a natural look to it. Looks great. So that is how our pieces have blocked out. Hey y'all, it's been about a week, hence I have different hair going on. And I just wanted to check in about my socks that I knit from this yarn and the elasticity. So they have continued to stretch out, and they're still fitting on my feet, but they're just a little more loose than I would like them to be. So what I am going to do is felt them a little bit, because the gauge just goes down 1 stitch per inch. And because this yarn has so much drape, it would lend itself really well to a drapey garment, like a shawl or a scarf or a loose fitting sweater or a shrug, or a slouchy hat. If you want your garment to be very form-fitting, I would suggest, if you're using this yarn, to go down some needle sizes because it will stretch out because of the elasticity of the silk, I believe. And what I'm going to do with my socks is just to felt them a little bit. If you factor in that account with your gauge, you could also do that because you still have great stitch definition and it looks really good, just with a little light felting. So that is my recommendation of this yarn, and be sure to like and subscribe because there will be more yarn review videos. Coming up is also some instructional videos on how to knit. So if you leave a comment about what yarns you want me to review, then I can have better access to that yarn and do a review like this, similar. If there's something that I missed that you wanted to know about the yarn, then please leave a comment. Feedback is welcome. And stay tuned. See you later.